want to dive into the new album, Friends and Family, um, a collection of covers. And I guess the first question I had when anyone, even professional musicians tackle someone else's work is the question of, okay, what do you do to honor the original, but also put your own stamp on it?
Okay. For anybody who doesn't know, the Friends and Family album, my Firefall manager and also record label called me about a little over a year ago, year and a half ago, and said, Jock, a lot of the original members of Firefall played in other famous bands like the Byrds, the Flying Breeder Brothers, Spirit, JoJo Gunn, Dan Fogelberg, in my case, Graham Parsons.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you guys do an album by those guys? And when he said that, the light bulb went on. I went, well, that's a great idea. How about we expand that a little bit? Because in 1976, when Firefall's first album was released and shot up the charts and went gold real quick and put us on tour with a lot of the best bands of the day.
Yeah.
I said, we toured with so many bands and got to be friends with them, like Fleetwood Mac, first during the White Album, and then Rumors, the Doobie Brothers, the band with Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson and Marshall Tucker and Leonard Skinner and all these bands. Let's add a song of those bands too. And he said, that's great. And then as soon as the concept got in place, I knew that there was a huge responsibility for us, not only to make the songs as great as we could make them, whether we did them just like the record, the original record, or whether we changed it around a little bit. But there was a lot of responsibility on the picking of the songs.
Right.
And Lynn, when he said, you guys used to tour with the band, oh, that's great. You guys can do Up on Cripple Creek. And I went, no friggin' way. I said, Levon Helm is the only guy that really should ever sing that song. And then somebody, when we were trying to figure out what Heart song to do, somebody suggested, hey, let's do Barracuda. And I went, no. Barracuda is like off limits. That's a Heart song. So, we had to pick very carefully. And, some songs were an immediate choice, like on Loggins and Messina, Angry Eyes. That song is very much like Firefall from the get-go anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to know Jim Messina and Kenny Loggins really well back in the 70s. We did their last tour with them, with Loggins and Messina. And then, of course, Kenny Loggins had the breakout and started, was a huge star by himself.
Yeah.
And for instance, when you do a song by another band, like, for instance, once we picked Part of the Plan by Dan Fogelberg,
mm-hmm.
I knew that we needed to keep that thing right down the pipe and pretty much like Dan recorded it.
Yeah.
And, when it came time for me to do the guitar solo on that, I went, I'm doing Dan's solo,
mm-hmm.
because that's the solo that everybody pretty much expects. Right. And yeah, I could play a great solo in D, A, and G, that wasn't Dan's, but again, honoring the music of the 60s and 70s and the bands and artists who originally recorded them, we made that one straight down the pike. Now, I also knew that it's not Dan singing, it's one of our guys.
Right.
It's, new studio techniques, new guitar sounds. It's not going to sound exactly like the original, even if we did it like the original.
Right.
So, and then there were some other songs, like I didn't know which Doobie Brothers song to do. And once we decided on Long Train Running, I started listening to that. And what I didn't want to do was on Long Train Running and listen to the music is that signature Doobie Brother, that guitar part that Tommy Johnson played on the original. When I listened to Long Train Running, there's a second guitar part that really plays an important role on their original version, but it's not out front like the number one that I just described. And I decided, well, let's make that number two guitar part on their version, the original version. Let's make that our number one guitar part. And though it's in there, the number one guitar part of Tommy Johnson's, the signature rhythm guitar stuff, it's in ours, but we kind of made it a little bit less important in the track. And instead of harmonica, I thought, well, this would be a great song for some sax. And, again, the vocals with Steve Weinmeister and John Bisaha, our new bass player, lead singer, they were going to be great, and it wouldn't sound like the Doobie Brothers, and we put it in a different key. So that was one of the tunes on this record that I deliberately tried to make a little bit different and yet stay true to the original.
Right. Although, interestingly, though, if you see the Doobie Brothers playing nowadays, when they do Long Train Running, they do have a sax guy that travels with them,
right,
full-time, Mark Russo.
Right, he's great.
Yeah, fantastic. And they do it's interesting because it's almost like they had the similar idea in that, okay, we've been doing this song for decades and decades, let's see how we can stay true to it. And so they, inject a little bit of horn to it live,
right,
a la the way you guys did. And so that's, I don't know, I guess that's kind of the concept of, wow, all these, kind of great minds think alike, kind of, how can we stay true and yet create something interesting?
Right. Well, that brings me to a point that I've been asked a couple of times on some interviews recently. So I know as band leader that when we play a song like You Are the Woman or Just Remember I Love You or Cinderella or Strange Way,
yeah,
that needs to sound as much like the record as we can make it, because that's what people are paying good money to hear. Oh, my favorite song, Just Remember I Love You, whatever. And I really don't like it. And there's been plenty of bands that I've toured with in the past 20, 30 years that they have one big hit or two big hits, and they've gotten so tired of playing that song live that they change it a lot. And if you change the song too much, the crowd doesn't recognize it until you get to the chorus and you go, oh my God, this is my favorite song. I didn't know.
Right.
I really think that you owe a big responsibility to the crowd and the audience and the people who bought tickets to come and see you, on those songs I named of Firefall, they need to sound like our records back from the 70s. But having said that, Firefall's lucky enough to have a number of songs like My Guitar Solo in Mexico or the flute solo in Strange Way, where we can stretch out and maybe go somewhere new, on a given night and really play around and jam a little bit that isn't on the record. So I kind of have the best of both worlds, to really play the songs like they're supposed to be, Firefall songs, and also let's be a little adventurous and stretch out a little bit. Yeah. But again, without our fans buying tickets, we don't go on the road. And if you go out on the road and don't sound like they expect you to, they're going to go home going, man, they played that song so different. I hated it or whatever. So, it's up to the bands to really keep it down the pike where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Number one, I would say, even worse than changing it up is when a band takes a few songs they're tired of playing and crams them all into a melody, which really
medley.
Medley, excuse me, which really pisses people off. And my whole thing is like, look, if the Stones can still play Satisfaction, you can play your song. I mean,
no kidding.
Right. But then going back to the idea of, covering some of these tunes, because you mentioned the band and you mentioned Levon Helm, and that made me think of their cover of Springsteen's Atlantic City, which, it was originally Springsteen, and then they covered it, but I love the greasy nature of Levon Helm's delivery of that song. And I don't think it takes away from it, but that's why I get excited when I do see albums like this, where it's like, okay, I'm really curious what this band can do to put a different spin on things.
Right. You know, I wasn't really too concerned with putting a different spin on things or doing it just like the original.
Yeah.
You know, we once we picked each song, and a couple of times I didn't even listen to the original. Like for instance, on In the Heart of the Night by Poco, and we got to be great, great friends with the late great Rusty Young and Paul Cotton for the last 30 years, touring with them a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm really familiar with that song. And yes, I know Firefall doesn't have a pedal steel guitar player like Rusty's all over their original version of the Paul Cotton song. I just figured, well, I think I'll play slide on that. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't even really listen to the original that we were doing a new version of. And then on other songs, I'd really study them and go, well, here's where we'll make it a little bit different. So it was really interesting. Let me tell you a story, though, about when we toured with the band. We did their last tour pretty much, opening up for them. And, sometimes toward the end of their stint they're playing, and then they went out to make The Last Waltz, the movie, and break up. Sometimes they'd have that 5-piece Civil War horn section playing live with them all around Garth Hudson in the back. But after we'd play our little 45-minute set or whatever as an opening band, I'd go back and get a Coke or drink, and I'd go and position myself behind the curtain. And for night after night after night, I was about 8 or 10 feet away from Levon Helm and just watched him do what he did. Mm. And he had to be one of the funkiest people alive, not only singing, but the way he played drums, it was just so organic. And, the band was, those first 2 band albums, Big Pink and then the Brown album, were 2 of the best American albums ever made, and of course Robbie Robertson just recently died, and the only guy left is Garth Hudson, and he's in a nursing home. And, but I just look back at that time and thank my lucky stars that Firefall hit at a time when the music was active and great. And in the 70s, when that was before record labels kind of got their hands around bands' throats in the 80s. And, well, you can't do that, or you have to sound like this or whatever. In the 70s, bands, if you had a good album's worth of material, labels would sign you and not try to mess with your sound, and that's where all the great bands came from. When you think of the 70s and you have Steely Dan, unbelievable, and Little Feat and the band, and then you have the Eagles and Dan Fogelberg and Firefall and Little River Band. You have all these great bands playing their own material. I don't think there'll ever be a time again like that.
Maybe not. And it's funny because you do listen to some of these things, especially longer, stretches of these pieces, and you're like, wow, no label would ever let a band get away with this, nowadays. Right. But it's fabulous, and thank God that they did.
Yeah, and like for instance, when we cut Loggins and Messina's Angry Eyes, the original, back in their hippie days where they had all these different solos and different parts, that thing on their album is about 8 or 9 minutes long. Yeah. So I knew we had to kind of, okay, let's play that, that really signature and the hook sax line, and we'll kind of cut, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to try to get our version down to 5 or 6 minutes, still honoring the original. Same thing with Simple Man, and as a lead guitar player, now one of the differences I think between me and a lot of other lead guitar players is I learned early on when I was a student of the famous jazz guitar player of the 40s and 50s, Johnny Smith, that taste and playing tastefully isn't really what you play, it's what you don't play. And the spaces you leave. And the other thing I learned after I started getting into bands in Boulder, Colorado, and really playing, I personally, and once Firefall formed, all of us in the band, everything we played individually was about to make the song better.
Yeah.
It wasn't about to show off how fast I can play or, hey, aren't I great? It's all about the song. And, I have a quick story for you. So I met Rick Roberts, who had replaced Graham Parsons in the Flying Burrito Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
I met him when I absolutely fell into the Graham Parsons, Emmylou Harris Fallen Angels gig in Boulder, Colorado, when their guitar player for their first show on their road wasn't really up to snuff. And they looked around, and I went down and I sat in and I got hired.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day I went on the road. I met Rick Roberts, and, now I wasn't a country picker, not at all. And that's, and here I was trying to learn James Burton's licks off of the GP albums and all of that. And, driving down the road in the bus, trying to drop the needle on it to learn a certain lick.
Yeah.
And, all this kind of stuff. So anyway, when I met Rick, we said, you live in Boulder? I live in Boulder. Hey, we should get together. And, he kind of thought, yeah, right. You're not a very good country guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
But then he came to a place I was playing in Boulder with my rock band that I was playing with. And he went, wow, this is the same guy, just burning it up in a rock idiom. So I started playing with Rick, and he thought he was going to make his third solo record on A&M Records, and I was going to be his guitar player, which I was totally cool with. And then Mark Andes, who had been in Spirit and JoJo Gunn and was one of the guys who left LA and moved to the mountains above Boulder, Colorado, like in the early 70s, like Stephen Stills, Chris Hillman, Dan Fogelberg, Joe Walsh, Carl Wilson, Richie Fury, they all moved to the mountains above Boulder. And, and it was amazing. So when Mark Andes got involved with our jam sessions with Rick Roberts and I, it suddenly didn't feel like a solo record anymore. It felt like the beginnings of a band.
Yeah.
And Rick said to us, I know this guy in Washington, D.C., Larry Burnett, who writes great songs and sings great, and he and I sing great together. Do you want to hear a song? And we said, sure. This was about, 5 years before cassette tapes were invented. So he puts on this big reel-to-reel tape. And the first song of Larry's we heard was Cinderella. No. And we all went, oh, my God. And, and what was interesting is when Larry came out to Colorado, in the first week of practice, before we had a name of a band, before we had any gigs, it was about a month and a half before Michael Clark from the Byrds had joined the band. We had 20 or 25 original songs to work out that first week of practice of Rick and Larry's. And the interesting thing about that was a year and a half later, when we made our first album, about 4 or 5 of those songs were on the album, so our first week of rehearsal, when we were just trying to figure things out, we played Mexico and It Doesn't Matter and Livin' Ain't Livin' and Cinderella. We had all these great songs. And, frankly, that's unheard of, to form a band and have 25 songs to start with.
Yeah.
And thank you, Rick and Larry, because to me, Firefall and really any successful band, it's all about the songs first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And the players have to gear their playing toward making the song better. So, and it's really great because a lot of our Firefall songs recorded back in the mid 70s and late 70s still stand up and sound great today.
Yeah. And backing up just slightly to your jazz background, there's one other guitarist I've interviewed who had the same thing, Scotty Johnson, who plays with the Gin Blossoms.
Oh
He
wow.
came up learning, he would learn jazz guitar, and he said, because and so, I was like very curious. All right, how did that affect how you approach things in the rock world? He said it, for him, it meant the solos were very different from a lot of typical rock solos, and that because of jazz background, he learned a little bit more about how to build a solo off the melody line and such. And I'm
Right.
curious if that was the case for you, and if that's what you attribute to your having a distinct solo style.
Well, I'm sure it did. Now, I quit taking lessons from Johnny Smith when I was like 14. Me, like tens of millions of other American kids, our lives changed after February 9th, 1964, with the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. And
Yeah.
I kind of went, I don't want to play jazz. I want to be in a rock band. And what Johnny Smith had really hammered into me was proper technique. When you're playing a bunch of eighth notes or 16th notes, by God, your notes have to be long and fill that space. And he
Yeah.
hammered technique into me, and he hammered melodies into me. And I think I learned on my own about, I think one of the really good things I do as a lead guitar player is, for instance, in a verse and or a chorus, I'll answer back what the vocalist just sang.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you play exactly what the melody was that he just sang, or you play something like it or something totally different, you're basically having this conversation with the vocalist who's singing, and you're answering back and making it, making the song better by making it a little bit more interesting. And I've never really thought that I overplayed too much when I was really concentrating on being a part of the song. And that's what lead guitar players really kind of need to do. I love the Gin Blossoms, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that my soloing was necessarily affected. The parts of my solos that later were affected by my time with Johnny Smith was precision, melody, taste is what you don't play more than what you play.
Yeah.
That whole concept, really carried over. But I think I just really developed my own style. And when I was playing with my 1958 Cherry Sunburst Gibson Les Paul through an old Fender Super amp, and I could, if I'm standing in the right place away from the amp,
Yeah.
you can hold a note as long as you want, on any note on any fret, so
Right.
that made me kind of think, okay, I don't really have to play a lot of notes. I can just hold this one. And the really cool thing about that is that when you get those overtones, you hit the note, and then a second or two later, it grows, and it has feedback notes of an octave above or a fifth, or these overtones that aren't just the note that you're playing and holding.
Yeah.
And it's really great. And of course, really, lead guitar players, it doesn't really matter what amp or guitar they play about, it's all bone tone, and a lot of what you sound like comes from here.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to have my own style, and I'm glad I do. And like I said a couple of times, I tried to play everything how I play it to make Rick Roberts or Larry Burnett's songs better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then building off of that, so I'm going through the liner notes, and there are a number of guest musicians that sit in on various songs on this album. What I found most interesting, because everyone, always pulls in all these great musicians, for guest spots. You pulled in a guy best known for being a guitar tech. And that's, and I mean, obviously, a guitar tech, they all know how to play guitar, but, Dallas Shue, who is currently best known as, being the guitar tech for The Edge and U2. And
Right. For 30 plus years.
yeah. And
So the story on Dallas,
Yeah.
It was really easy for me because Dallas was Firefall's first roadie, and
Hmm.
that was before the term guitar tech was invented. He was our roadie,
Yeah.
and we were his first national touring band. And after the original Firefall broke up and Rick Roberts was the last guy to quit, and the dust settled, and I realized that if I wanted to, I could keep Firefall going throughout the 80s and however long it lasted. Dallas went and started being the guitar tech for everybody from U2 to Paul McCartney making records to, Peter Gabriel to Bonnie Raitt and Jackson Brown, and just amazing. And Dallas has the best, is the top guitar tech in the world now. And
Yeah.
people are, he turned Bob Dylan down when he said, well, I can't, I'm doing a U2 tour,
Right.
but I knew, that I really wanted, I mean, on this album, we're playing "Can't You See" by Marshall
Marshall
Tucker, three
Tucker.
chords, or "Simple Man" by Leonard Skinner, three chords, and I asked Dallas, who all those records he's made with the big superstars, Paul McCartney and everybody, he's never played on an album. He's always handed the guitar to the guitar player and
Right.
here you go, and I need my strings changed. Okay, here you go. So I wanted to give Dallas a shot at playing on a song or two on an album. And he was like, oh, are you sure you want me to play on it? Yeah, I want you to play, and, for instance, on Can't You See, we have like 12 guitars playing anyway, so I just put Dallas in the soup and he's on that. And I know that he is really happy with having been asked to play on it. And I was happy to offer him, to play on his first record as an actual rhythm guitar player. That was an honor for me. But then, of course, we have people like John Jorgensen, who's like one of the best guitar players on the planet. When it came time to do the Bird song, I thought, John Jorgensen is the best guy to play this 12-string part. Go for it, John.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah. And, that's the interesting thing, because there is a variety on this. And I would say that the Bird song, Feel a Whole Lot Better, is, it's kind of the yin to the Simple Man yang, in that it's such a tight pop folk rock written tune. And I've always loved it. Tom Petty did a fabulous cover of it on Full Moon Fever, and to me it's one of the quintessential tunes that really defines the Birds and all the great stuff they did it. And but you don't hear a lot about it necessarily, or people don't talk about it that much. So I love that you guys included it. And then B, I'm wondering, you've obviously heard these songs like this one over and over again. Did you learn anything new with like the Bird song when you attempt to play it for the first time? It's a different thing.
Well, for instance, long before Firefall, when I was playing clubs in Boulder and maybe going on the road to Kearney, Nebraska and playing, cover stuff,
right?
I used to play and sing Feel a Whole Lot Better as a fan when I was, 20 years old.
Okay.
Years before Firefall. I got a scoop for you too. So we recorded So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star by the Byrds.
Okay.
We used to play Rock and Roll Star as our encore song for 6, 8, 10 years in the past with Firefall. And when it came time to really, because I only wanted to have one Bird song on this record, so we had a track of it, and it's about 3/4 of the way finished. The scoop is we're making a Friends and Family 2 album right now, and we're picking songs, and Rock and Roll Star is going to be a Bird song on there.
Cool.
And the only other song that I'll tell you about that we're doing is Love the One You Were With by Stephen Stills.
Oh.
But it's such a great concept, and there are so many fantastic songs that fit into that program of how we're choosing, you know, and we're not choosing a Crosby, Stills and Nash song, even though guys in Firefall knew, you know, or had played with David Crosby, or I played with Chris Hillman and everything, you know, and everything. But Crosby, Stills and Nash were not doing a song because we didn't have them directly in our history, you know, but we're certainly playing a Bird song, or, you know, we have Buffalo Springfield ties. And what's interesting, you mentioned Tom Petty, who, you know, God, Tom Petty was just, and the Heartbreakers were just so great. And by the way, his guitar player, Mike Campbell, is one of those guys that plays just what the song needs. Nothing more, nothing left. And he's fantastic. He's one of my faves. But our genealogy tree, the trunk of that tree is the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield from Southern California. And then there's Poco and Eagles and Loggins and Messino and Graham Parsons and all these people. And Firefall is legitimately at the top of that tree, you know, and there's really no other band in that tree, that genealogy tree, after us. And Tom Petty, he has his own tree, you know. Tom Petty, who played a lot of Birdsong, and, you know, when they first came out, they were copping Roger McGuinn and the Byrds and the 12-string, you know, big time. And then they kind of developed their own style that, you know, eclipsed and evolved from the Byrd stuff. But there's so many amazing bands from the 70s that, you know, it's really great being able to go, well, let's see, you know, because on this new album, the Friends and Family 2, I want to do a Beach Boys song, because we used to tour with all the time with those. And that's a tough one. You know, it's like, hey, let's do In My Room. I don't know, maybe not, you know. So
that's
we're picking, but there was a certain responsibility about picking the songs for this Friends and Family album that you have a copy of. And, you know, and I wanted to be real careful. And I'm glad we picked a song, you know, that wasn't a big hit for the band, but I'm glad we did Chest Fever. You know, that's one of my favorite songs of theirs. And it would, you know, and we certainly, like I said earlier, we wouldn't have done Up on Cripple Creek or a couple of those ones by the band, because, I mean, the band was one of the best American bands ever. And like I said, their first two albums are, you know, top 5 for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, even when that Big Pink album came out, Eric Clapton talked about he went to Woodstock hoping to join the band, because he was like, wow.
Right. You know? And I've read recently that he got to Woodstock and was hanging with all the guys and didn't have the courage to ask them if he could be in the band. You know, but the truth is that, you know, Clapton would have changed that. They could have had him play on a song or two, but, you know, Robbie Robertson, his distinctive guitar sound and all the songs he wrote. But, you know, the guy in the band that gets forgotten all the time is Richard Manuel. You know, now Rick Danko, great bass player and great singer.
Yeah.
But to have the 3 vocalists, Levon Helm, Richard Manuel, and Rick Danko, sing all the tunes would be like, oh, how great was that?
Right. And then, you know, of course, when, you know, they had their swan song, and suddenly you have the Staples singers, you know, throwing in extra vocals. It's like, wow, that was taking it to a new height.
Yeah. So I looked at this record, and I don't look at it as a cover album, even though technically that's what it is. You know, we honored each band and each song and the time that it came out, and whether it was the late 60s or early 70s. And frankly, when I was playing the solos on, you know, like for instance, Skynyrd had 3 of the top guitar players in your face back when they were happening, you know, and Dan Fogelberg, great guitar player, you know, Randy California, great guitar player, you know. And like, for instance, when we did Can't You See by Marshall Tucker, I didn't learn any of Toy Caldwell's licks. And I remember I got to know Toy a little bit, and we compared Les Paul's a number of times, you know, at sound check and stuff. But, you know, I had in the back of my mind toy in my brain when I played that, trying to honor how great he was, and all of those guys were. So, that was really cool. And we have Howard Leese from Heart play the solo on What About Love.
Yeah, yeah. Although I thought that was interesting because that's from later Heart
Right.
territory. At least time wise, it steps out. But
Well,
you guys
I didn't
kill
know.
it.
So after Mark Andes retired and quit the band, and this album, Friends and Family, was a lot about Mark, because he played in Heart and he played with Dan Fogelberg, and and all of that. And we got to be really good friends with Heart, back and toured with them a lot and everything. So Mark's replacement is the great, amazing lead vocalist John Bisaha, who also plays with the Babies, who they hardly ever work. They only play 6 or 7 gigs a year. And so, but Steve Weinmeister, who was in the band for 23 years and then left the band and then rejoined, those two vocalists are just so great. And I'm the third vocalist, but I didn't even really care if I sang on this record too much, because get those guys out there to do all the harmony vocal parts and stuff. I couldn't figure out which Heart song to do, and like I said, Barracuda, no. And, no, we shouldn't do that. How about Dog and Butterfly? I don't think so.
Yeah.
John, our new lead vocalist, said, I could really sing the heck out of What About Love? And I went, oh. And when your lead singer tells you he could sing the heck out of it, it's like, okay. And I knew that was an 80s Heart song that Mark Andes and the new Heart had played on.
Yeah.
Not the original 70s version, but I thought, hey, if John says that he can sing the heck out of it, and he did, and he and I are both good friends with Howard. I asked Howard if he wanted to not only play some power rhythm guitar on the song, but I asked him, hey, why don't you play the solo? You played such a great solo on the original Heart version of the 80s. And he said, oh, gosh, thanks. And he calls me back the next day and said, but you changed the chords on the solo. I can't play the same solo. And I went, I don't want you to play the same solo. Play something new, Howard. Come up with something. And he went, oh, okay. But I don't mind. I didn't mind at all passing some solos around to John Jorgensen or Howard, or, it's like, there's a lot of room for everybody,
Yeah, and points to him, because trying to take on someone like Ann Wilson's vocals, that is no easy feat. And so,
no kidding.
He really...
Of course, we changed the key from the Ann Wilson key, and on a few of those songs, like the Doobie Brothers song, if we would have done that in G minor like they did it, it would have sounded more like the original, just because the chords were exactly the same.
Yeah.
We put it down a couple keys and it's in E minor, and John sings it lower. And, I definitely wanted to make some of the tunes on that Friends and Family album be a bit different.
Yeah. I mean, because otherwise, what's the point? If you're trying to mimic the exact thing, people can listen to the original.
Yeah, exactly.
That's part of the fun. Is okay. What happens when you filter all these songs through the Firefall filter?
Right.
Yeah. So
exactly. And it's a good point too, because I've been making Firefall records for most of my adult life, so I know how to make a good Firefall record. So when you put, even with some newer guys in the band, not the original band, it puts our Firefall spin on some of these songs, and I'm really pleased with how good the record came out. Really proud of it.
Yeah, no, it does. It sounds great, and that's all the material I had. Is there anything we didn't cover about this that you want to discuss, or?
Let's see. No, but the album comes out, the full album. I mean, I turned the album in about a year ago.
Oh,
so wow. I've been chomping at the bit to get something out, because it's like, and Lynn immediately said, the Doobie Brothers, A Long Train Running, that's the first single. It's the best song on the record. That's got to be number one song you hear. And once as an artist you turn in a record to a record label, then it's kind of out of your control. They'll
Yeah.
pick the first single, they'll pick what they want to push, they'll pick whatever. So I went, really, the Doobie Brothers song you want to have be the first single? Oh yeah, oh yeah. And then about a month later he changed his mind and said, we're going to put Simple Man out first to just open the door to the concept. And
Mm-hmm.
then a few weeks before the album comes out on September 20th, we'll put out Long Train Running by the Doobies as the second single. And when he said that, I went, well, Simple Man by Leonard Skinner, we did a really good version of that, but it's 6.5 minutes long. You're
Yeah.
not going to get any radio airplay out of that. And he said, this isn't about radio. This is about, Amazon and Spotify and YouTube and all this stuff, which of course I'm a 70s guy, so I know nothing about Spotify, And I said, oh, okay, so it doesn't matter, And I even made a new version, a couple of new versions that were a little bit shorter on Simple Man. He says, no, we're going to put the 6.5 minute version out. And I went, okay.
Yeah, which is the way it should be. So thank
Yeah,
God for that.
and it was just so amazing. I really still, I shouldn't, but I still kick myself for not having a camera on those gigs. Because,
Yeah.
like I said, I'm sitting right next to Levon Helm playing, or when you'd go in front of, the original Doobie Brothers or Leonard Skinner, I had an all access pass, and I didn't even have an Instamatic to go, here's Leonard Skinner, and
Right.
I'm going, wow, I could sell those photos but it's so vibrant still in my mind, I mean, Firefall got to open a lot of shows for Fleetwood Mac during Rumors tour.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. They were the biggest band in the world then.
Yeah.
And here we'd get up on stage and play our 35 or 40-minute set. I think they really liked us. Mick and everybody really liked us opening up, because sometimes opening acts don't get sound checks, and we were a tight little unit, and we could, if we need be, we could do it without a sound check and just go out and play. And to play 75,000 people, 5 nights, 60, 70,000, 5 nights a week with Fleetwood Mac Rumors tour was just astounding to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been asked a bunch of times, well, did you get nervous playing in front of that many people? And if you're confident in what you do, me as a guitar player, and you're confident of the band, what they do, no, I wasn't nervous in front of 50,000 people. Now, you put me in a living room with 3 people watching me play a song, that's when I get nervous. Or hell, if you have a girlfriend and I wrote this song and you're going to play this song you wrote for your girlfriend, that's nerve-wracking.
Yeah. Or the only other great example I have is I did an interview with Greg Potter, who now runs the Buddy Rich band.
Wow.
Fantastic drummer. And he was doing it was over in London, and it was like, I don't know, something like a DW anniversary thing, and where they had all these drummers come in and play different stuff. And so he's running through it in rehearsal, and he said, then, Ian Pace of Deep Purple comes walking up behind me to look and see how I'm doing. And he said, that made me nervous. He said,
Right.
when your heroes come and they're like, all right, let's see what this kid has. That makes you nervous.
Well, I have one quick story for you too.
Oh.
When we went down to Criteria Studios in Miami to make our first couple of records, but our first album, nobody knew who Firefall was, although they might have known Michael Clark or Mark Andes or whatever. At Criteria, the Bee Gees were down the hall. Stephen Stills was down the hall. I knew that on that first album that my song to really show what I could do as a lead guitar player was on Rick Roberts' Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'd played it for 2 years before we went down to, got a record deal and went down to Miami to make our record, so I'm warming up out in the studio. People are in and out of the control room. I'm playing, the producer goes, you ready? Yeah, I'm ready. So I'm playing in the first verse. Good. The second verse. What's interesting is the day before I cut the solo and the licks on Mexico, we had the mariachi horn section come in and play that da 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 part in the middle of my solo, which I'd never had to contend with before as the soloist. So I'm playing, it gets to my solo, it's going good, and in my brain I'm thinking somewhere the horns are going to start playing. And I'm playing, and then I stop, and then they play, and then I play, and then they play, and I play. And then I finished the song off, and it ended up being a one-take performance with my guitar and my amp and my fingers just playing great. And the producer, Jim Mason, pushes the button and said, "That was fantastic. Come on in." And I said, "You know, Jim, I had no idea where the horns were going to play. Let me see if I can just play that section again and see if I can beat it." And he said, "No." And I went, "No, really, Jim, I think I could play that little section a little better." And he pushed the button and said, "No, come on in." I went, "No." Okay, I take my guitar off. I walk in the control room to give him a piece of my mind. And the first person I see is my guitar hero, Eric Clapton, who's been watching me play that one take solo.
Oh,
and
my
that
God.
one take deal. Oh, and I turned into Jackie Gleason, you know, you know, and he stood up and shook my hand and said, "Keen playing, man." And he left. The only time I ever met Eric Clapton. And the producer goes, "Now, what did you want to do over again?" And I went, "No, nothing. I can't even play." And it's a good thing I didn't know he was there watching me when I was playing, because I was all Mr. Right Brain, just play it off the top of your head. But, you know, that's example of, you know, I only got nervous after I met him, you know, and it was a good thing that I played without knowing he was there.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. No, that that must, yeah, that's even now, that must be weird listening to that, knowing, you know,
Right.
Slow Hand is just, you know, one room away.
Yeah. And he was, you know, yeah, really. And that was right around the time of his 461 Ocean Boulevard album that he recorded at Criteria. So he was a regular at Criteria. There's another time I'll tell you about real quick, and then we can end when, if you want, is I was asked to write a suicide prevention song for the cause. And I wrote a song called "Call on Me," which is on my solo record Blindside. And they put it out at Colorado Springs and raised a little money, and you know, that was it. And I kind of went, well, I've got this really great song that came out real quick and is about suicide prevention that hardly anybody's talking about. I should do something with this song. So I put on a couple of benefits. The first one in Nashville at the Bluebird. Michael McDonald was my headliner. I knew him well from the Doobies. David Pack from Ambrosia, great singer-writer. Rusty Young from Poco, a couple of other people. And at halftime during our benefit in Nashville, in front of like 125 people at the Bluebird, really, you know, really small place, Michael McDonald comes up to me and he said, "Hey, Jock, Steve Winwood's in the audience. Would you mind if he got up and played a few songs?" And I went,
"Oh my God."
"Oh." I said, "Would I mind? Get him up here." You know, it's like, wow. So, you know, in the second half of the show, Michael introduces Steve Winwood, and he comes up and he grabs my guitar and plays "Can't Find My Way Home" by Blind Faith. And after the song, he went, "Thank you very much." He takes the guitar off and waves and is going to get off stage. And Michael grabs him by the shirt and says, "No, give me some lovin'." And Steve went, "Oh, okay." So he sits down at Michael's keyboard, and piano, and he looks up at Michael and said, "I need an organ sound for that song." And Michael goes, "Oh yeah, here you go." So anyway, we played, you know, and "Give Me Some Lovin'" is one of my favorite rock songs, top 3 ever. You know, 15-year-old Steve Winwood singing it with Spencer Davis Band.
Yeah.
And so we're playing, and here, like 2 feet in front of me, is Steve Winwood singing that. I'm singing on a mic the background parts with Michael McDonald. David Pack is right next to us singing, and I'm thinking, I'm singing my favorite song, "Give Me Some Lovin'," with 3 of the very best rock singers going. Steve Winwood, Michael McDonald, David Pack. And I said, I guess I can die and go to heaven now. And it's like, but I wasn't nervous. I was like, wow, this is just the coolest time. And I have little moments in my career that are really charmed, and I look back on and go, wow, I was there.
Yeah. And I guess I would say that's the argument against, the idea of, oh, I wish I had taken pictures and all this. I think it's better to just be in the moment on a lot of these occasions and
Right.
just to get the whole vibe of the room and soak it all in rather than putting even back then this bulky piece of equipment between you and what you're experiencing.
Right. I agree. Now, I must say that in the years after that, it surfaced that somebody was taking some pictures out in the crowd. And I have a picture of Michael McDonald, David Pack, me, and Steve Winwood playing my guitar on, and I'm going, wow, it's great to have a picture of
Yes.
that. But you're right. There's something about, in my mind, sitting back and being 10 feet away from Levon Helm doing what he did, is just so vibrant in my mind that, it's probably good that I don't have any pictures.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right, cool. Well, I think we got a lot of great material. So, I will hopefully get this up and posted sometime next week. And well, now I'm looking forward to the second version of Friends and Family.
We'll talk
And
again when that one comes out, or next year, call me
yeah,
back and we'll have another one.
I'd love to chat again.
Well,
Uh,
thank you. It's been
sure.
great.
Oh yeah, no, it's my pleasure. This has been fun, and thanks for letting me listen to the CD because I really prefer to get the full experience via CD or a vinyl rather than
Right.
streaming.
I just know how lucky and fortunate I am. And yeah, I'm a really good guitar player. And it took me many years and decades to realize that I deserve to be in this place that I'm at now.
Hmm.
But to look at it and go, the past and all the gold and platinum records I got on my wall, and having been through all these great stories that I'm now starting to tell people, what a blessing. And if nothing else, it's humbling because, to think, yeah, I got to meet Levon Helm and Rick Danko and had a drink with them, at some party we were at after the show. It was like, wow.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's cool, and you got to see them in action doing what they do best.
Yeah, exactly. Or, yeah, like Fleetwood Mac during Rumors would just be like, I'd be, oh my God, here we are in front of 70,000 people. And, Stevie Nicks is singing, and, Lindsey Buckingham's one of my heroes. And,
Hmm.
when we picked World Turning off of that album, I wanted to, I was thinking of Lindsey the whole time when I was doing all those guitar parts.
Oh wow, wow. And which is especially interesting considering he had no official training in guitar.
Right.
And as far as I know, can't even read music, and so it's it says a lot that a guy like you who had all this formal education, especially in the world of jazz, appreciated all that this
Right.
guy was doing just by ear.
Interestingly enough, I haven't read music like when I was 12 years old with Johnny Smith. I haven't read music in 40 years.
Uh,
I'm a rock guy that, oh, okay, we're in the key of A minor, great.
right.
It's like, what am I going to play? I don't know. I'm going to just play it. You
Yeah.
know, Actually, last thing I'll tell you was I bought the Fresh Cream album with Clapton and Ginger Baker and uh God, why can't I think of the bass player's name? Jack Bruce.
Yeah.
I bought the album cover when I was in high school, a senior in high school, because I thought the cover looked cool. I'd never heard of Eric Clapton before. And when I played the first song on the Fresh Cream album and Clapton took his first solo, it was like the heavens opened up. And at that moment, I realized everything I had ever played up to that point had been written on paper by somebody for me, right? And you'd
Oh.
listen to Clapton and you're going, wow, he's playing from the heart or from the soul, or, oh my God, I want to do that,
Hmm.
and immediately I started going, okay, I'm going to be in a band. and I'm going to play solos like I feel like it, and not, and, reading music, it was great. And the whole training I got, but I haven't had to read music on a chart for 40, 50 years, and I'm sure I couldn't do it now with all the sharps and flats, and we're in the key of B flat. Oh,
You're
like, B flat, I can play B flat.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.